Okay, this is part 3 of quotes about art from the book called The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes, written by me, Pete Rogers. Okay, so the first quote from John Ruskin. John Ruskin is the greatest art critic who ever lived. He was an Oxford professor in the mid-1800s in England. He was the teacher of Oscar Wilde. He was part of the Victorian Renaissance, the Catholic Revival. He is the most famous for his speech about the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. I will actually put a link to it in this video today, in 1853. It's a magnificent speech. It's the greatest speech ever in the history of art criticism. Okay, so here's his first quote. "Remember that it is the glory of Gothic architecture that it can do anything. Music, when healthy, is the teacher of perfect order, and when depraved, the teacher of perfect disorder." And there's a lot of truth in that. You know, it's ennobling to listen to great Christian Catholic music versus it's degrading to listen to a lot of beat music, rap music, and all that other stuff. It makes you stupid and vulgar versus something positive and good. I never like beat music. Bunk, bunk, bunk. It pushes the thought out of your brain. I prefer silence when I'm thinking. I prefer in the car to listen to an audiobook. But I know the worst thing is when there's a loud beat. Grunge music, heavy metal, when it's grungy, that's bad. If it's melody, that's not so bad. Melody, you can understand the words, you can enjoy it. But a loud noise, bump, 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 it pushes the thought out of your brain. You can't think when there's a loud beat of a noise. So, okay, anyways. Ruskin continues, "Education is the leading of humans to what is best, and making what is best out of them. The training which makes men happiest in themselves also makes them most serviceable to others. The art of drawing, which is of more real importance to the human race than that of writing, should be taught to every child just as writing is." I would agree with that. I would say that schools would be much better if they would teach children how to draw rather than mathematics. Because everybody thinks, oh, you need to know mathematics. Why do you need to know mathematics for? Okay? Like I said, I never use any math beyond what I knew already by about 3rd or 4th grade. So what was the point in all that trigonometry, algebra, statistics and calculus and physics and stuff? It really is not used by almost anyone. Okay, everybody has to communicate. There's a ton of things that would be more useful to learn than that. Okay. Next from Mason Cooley. "Art begins in imitation and it ends in innovation." Yeah, so all the artists, you look in the Renaissance, what do? The young artists, they're apprenticed to a senior master. They go around helping out, learning how all the supplies work, and then they copy the paintings of the masters until they can do it well enough that they can imitate what they see, and then they start to add their own improvisation and variety based on an eclectic mix of the different techniques they've learned and their own ideas. Okay, here's a quote by Ayn Rand about art. "Art is the concretization of metaphysics." So basically, you take an idea about what you value, what you think is good and true, you believe in it and right, and you put it into a painting. Irving Stone, he's the author of The Agony and the Ecstasy, the book and then the movie about Michelangelo and his sort of arguments back and forth with Pope Julius. And that's the great movie, The Agony and the Ecstasy, where Michelangelo was Charlton Heston and Pope Julius was Rex Harrison. Same guy who was in My Fair Lady. Okay, Irving Stone says, "Normal people don't create art." And there's actually truth in that. To create art, you have to believe you got a special idea, either that you're going to draw or sculpt or whatever it might be, and you have to push on it. Okay, normal behavior is just to be conformist and to not do anything original or outspoken. You know, and I think that if you want to be creative, you have to, by definition, to create anything new, be nonconformist. Okay, let's see what this guy has to say. Louis Nizer, he says, "A man who works with his hands is a laborer. A man who works with his hands and his brain is a craftsman. But a man who works with his hands and his brain and his heart is an artist." Okay, John Keats, he says, "The excellency of every art is its intensity." Xiao Bei says, "The faults that make a man absurd seldom make him hateful. He escapes loathing through ridicule." I'm not sure how that one ended up in my art quotes, but it did. Okay, now we get some little bit better stuff. Here's Albert Camus, author of The Stranger, the French guy. I didn't really like The Stranger, but I did like some of his quotes. Here's Camus. "Art advances between two chasms, which are frivolity and propaganda, on the ridge where the great artist moves forward. Every step is an adventure, an extreme risk. In that risk, however, and only there, lies the freedom in art." Yeah, my favorite quote from Camus is the one where he says, "Within my heart in that winter, I always had a summer," or something like that. I like it. Okay, here's a quote from Bell Hooks. "The function of art is more than to tell it like it is. It is to imagine what is possible." Okay, now that's really a spoof on Aristotle, because Aristotle had said before that poetry is more important than history, because history only shows you the way things have been, whereas poetry shows you how they could be. And that's seen as like your lifeline in your mind's eye of how things could be, what to aspire to. Okay, Friedrich Nietzsche. Everybody gave me a hard time for calling him Nietzsche and said I got to call him Nietzsche. I like Nietzsche better. Okay, the great end of art is to strike the imagination with the power of a soul that refuses to admit defeat, even in the midst of a collapsing world. Gee, does that sound familiar? So we're all afraid that we're going to be gone by 2030, but let us persevere anyways, and hopefully we won't be. Okay, George Sand, the English writer from the 1800s. "Art for art's sake is an empty phrase. Art for the sake of the true, for the sake of the good and the beautiful. That is the faith I am searching for." Okay, where does that come from? Art for art's sake. Art for art's sake was part of these homosexuals in England in the 1800s, okay? And the guy was, Oscar Wilde, I thought he was pretty good, and he was a Christian. He's a Catholic on his deathbed. He had been forced to be Protestant at times in his life, but he had that Christian element to his art. Versus Potter, I think it's Pater, was another Oxford professor who, and they pushed this idea of art for art's sake, rather than art prior to that was largely a religious thing. Okay, and part of that was because, the church was the main patron. There wasn't that much of a middle class. Not that many people had enough money to pay for art. The Medicis did in Italy, of course, and they did commission a lot of great art as well, and a lot of stuff from the ancient Greeks, okay, versus the church, of course, was Christian stuff. Okay, La Bruyere. "Disgrace kills hatred and jealousy. Once someone is no longer a favorite and no longer envied, he might even be a hero and not annoy us." Okay, that kind of goes with the quote I had a moment ago somewhere in here. Okay, Aldous Huxley. "The finest works of art are precious, among other reasons because they make it possible for us to know, if only imperfectly and for a little while, what it feels like to think subtly and to feel nobly." Okay, good art. It's ennobling. All right, Anne Lamott from Bird by Bird, Some Instructions on Writing in Life. She says, "To be great, art has to point somewhere." Yeah, there should be meaning. Duh. Okay, Boris Pasternak. "All great, genuine art resembles and continues the revelation of St. John." Okay, well, that's a pretty deep. He's the guy who wrote Dr. Zhivago, so I like him for that. Okay. Here's a quote from George Bernard Shaw, the Irish writer, playwright. "The true artist will let his wife starve, his children go barefoot, his mother drudge for his living at 70, sooner than work at anything but his art." Okay, so that's our art quotes for today. I hope some of that was useful to you.